Thank you for joining us today for our Senate Education Committee meeting. I'm going to start off by just double checking. Do we have any committee members that are on us with Zoom or with WebEx? Is Senator Erickson with us? Okay, thank you. All righty. So today we are going to have a hearing on Senate Bill 66. So first up, we will have Tamara, our reviser, to step us through Senate Bill 66. That's the Interstate Teacher Mobility Compact to recognize equivalent, and I'm going to emphasize the word equivalent teacher licenses across member states. Thank you for being with us today, Tamara.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good afternoon, committee. Senate Bill 66 is based on a model compact that came about as a result of efforts from the Council of State Governments, the Department of Defense, and the National Association of State Directors of Teacher Education and Certification. Before I get into my brief, I did want to let you know that they have established a website called teachercompact.org if you would like additional information about their efforts and this compact. The compact is composed of 13 articles, so I'll go through each one very briefly. Article 1 is on page 1 and establishes the purposes of the compact. Article 2 provides definitions for relevant terms used throughout the compact. And Article 3, which begins on page 3 of the bill, provides the requirements for licensure under the compact, including reciprocity. Licensure under the compact only applies to the initial grant of a license by a receiving state. Each member state would compile a list of eligible licenses that it will consider for equivalency under the compact. If a member state receives an application for licensure by a teacher holding an unencumbered eligible license, the receiving state would determine which license the teacher is qualified to hold and grant that license. This determination is the sole decision of the receiving state's licensing authority. And I would like to note that active military members or eligible military spouses may receive licenses from a receiving state even if their license is not unencumbered. Article 4 begins on page 4 and provides the specific instances when a state's licensing authority does not fall under the compact. Article 5 provides teacher qualifications and requirements for licensure under the compact. Specifically, except for active military members or eligible military spouses, as I noted just a moment ago, a teacher is only eligible to receive a license if the teacher's current license is unencumbered. Article 6 on page 5 states that nothing in the compact limits the authority of a member state to investigate or impose disciplinary measures. Additionally, member states are required to provide and are authorized to receive information regarding any investigation or discipline, and that information would be secure and confidential. Article 7 establishes the Interstate Teacher Mobility Compact Commission. Each member state would have one commissioner on the commission, and each commissioner would have one vote on commission rules and bylaws. This article also provides for the powers and duties of the commission, which you can see in the bill starting in line 14 on page 6. I want to specifically draw your attention to their authority to promulgate uniform rules to implement and administer the act, because this will come up in a later article. Additionally, Article 7 authorizes the commission to elect an executive committee and levy an assessment on each member state or impose fees on other parties. Article 7 also provides for meeting requirements, financing, and indemnification of certain people within the commission. Article 8 is on page 10 and provides the commission's rulemaking authority that I just mentioned and states that the rules of the commission carry the force of law in member states. It does allow them to adopt emergency rules in certain situations. Additionally, a majority of member state legislatures may veto a rule of the commission. Excuse me. Article 9 provides for the facilitation of the exchange of information to administer and implement the provisions of the compact. Article 10 provides the oversight, dispute resolution, and enforcement of the compact. The executive and judicial branches of each member state are tasked with enforcement of the compact to ensure its purposes and intent are effectuated. Also, the commission would enforce the rules of the compact and may initiate legal action by majority vote. Article 11 is on page 13 and states that the compact takes effect on the date of enactment by the 10th member state. States that joined the compact before the first convening of the commission are charter member states, and any member state may withdraw from the compact by repealing the enacting statute in that state. Article 12 states that the compact would be liberally construed, and Article 13 reiterates that any other law of a member state that is consistent with the compact is still in effect and enforceable, and the bill would take effect upon publication in the statute book, and I would be happy to answer any questions.
Committee, as you know, just like other compacts, this is a very large document. What questions do you have about any of the portions of the document? I'm not seeing any questions, which is very interesting. We'll see if we come up with some more questions as we work our way through this bill. So first up, we do have proponents that are here in person. We'll start with our colleague and our fellow committee member, Senator Pat Petty.
It's on? I turned it off. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm Senator Pat Petty, and I'm here speaking in favor of Senate Bill 66. I might say that I became aware of this legislation when I attended the Council of State Governments National Conference that some of you were at as well. And at first hearing about it, I was a little bit skeptical because I thought about the powers of our State Board of Education. And then as I investigated it more and looked into licensure activities that are going on in our state, I felt that it was worthwhile for us to look at this legislation and put this opportunity out here. As Tamara said in her thorough review of this bill, it is part of a compact. Every state that enters the compact has to pass the same piece of legislation. It was mentioned by Tamara about a website that you can go on to. I would suggest you look at that because there is a map there that shows that right now there are 10 states that have introduced the legislation, and actually 2 states that have moved it out of committee, that being Colorado and I think it's Hawaii. It is moving forward, or no, I'm sorry, that was Mississippi. But Hawaii has had a hearing last week. So it is moving forward in other states, but of course it does take 10 states to participate. I will reiterate a few points about the compact. It preserves the existing state-based licensure system. It creates an alternative path to licensure for teachers relocating to a compact state. So if we are a compact state and Missouri is not, and a teacher is moving from Missouri to Kansas, they would not fall under the guidelines of this because they're not coming from a compact state. To be eligible, that teacher that's moving from one compact state to another does have to have a valid license from their state, and it has to be an unencumbered license. That qualified teacher then would request a teacher license based on that license currently held from another state, and then that person would undergo a background check, and the Department of Education would determine the most appropriate equivalent license to issue. The licensure is not required to complete state-specific requirements until their renewal. So they would receive, they would be approved for, and it could be that you were coming from another state and you might have you might be licensed in a couple of areas, but it might not match licensing in Kansas. It improves communications between states, and as Tamara mentioned, once you're in a compact, there's a sharing of information between the compact states. Any adverse actions or disciplines or sanctions are reported regularly to the Commission and shared with the member states. And the compact would provide a venue for joint problem solving and discussion. As I said, that teacher coming into Kansas who's from a compact state does require a criminal background checks. This licensure does improve the license portability for teachers, and it improves the portability for military spouses. It hopefully will help once the compact is in place. And, as I mentioned, 10 states, we can all kind of estimate all 10 states probably aren't going to pass this legislation this year. But once that happens, then it will take some time for that compact itself, for the representation to be put in place. So just as the state board, when we had a presentation on licensing, just as it takes time within the state of Kansas to make any changes in licensing, because they're looking at all the parameters and checking with superintendents and teachers associations to see how these work out, we know that nothing happens overnight. The same thing would be true with a compact. But it does create an agreed upon regulatory framework for teacher reciprocity. And it does speed up the application process for moving licensees from one state, compact state, to another. It just adds one more tool in the State Board of Education's licensure toolbox. With that, I ask the Senate Education Committee when, I'll be glad to stand for questions, and I ask for passage at appropriate time. Thank you.
Committee, do you have any questions for Senator? We'll start with Senator Dietrich.
Thank you for the presentation, Senator Petty. So if I was taking notes and wrote this down correctly, so once a teacher is given the opportunity to teach in Kansas, even though she or he may not have a Kansas license, they do have a time period that they will need to meet the requirements to renew their certificate. So is that initial certificate a 2-year or a 5-year? Do you know that?
I am sorry, I did not double check that. I think it's a 5-year. Does anybody in the room know for sure? I think it's a 5-year. I was thinking it was either a 3 or a 5, but I think it would be a 5-year.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Senator Sykes, and then we'll go to Senator Straub.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for being here, Senator. So if we join the compact, they're kind of the structure that's going to put forth these guidelines for the community. So if we joined it earlier, we would have a say then if we wanted to join it at a later time? Or do we have to be a part of the compact from the beginning?
And no, the compact can grow, but it has to have 10 states in order to become an official compact.
And so after the 10 states came, they're going to put together kind of the formula, the skeleton of what this compact looks like. So the advantage of being one of the first states would be having a say of what that looks like.
I'll defer to the reviser.
Yes, in Article 11, it states that states that join the compact before the first convening of the commission are charter members, and so they would be the group that would make those rules and bylaws. And if you join after that initial meeting, you would be subject to the bylaws as they already exist.
Okay, thank you. That should have been a question for you, and I was late.
And that's fine. Now we'll go to Senator Straub.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Senator Petty. Can you kind of explain a little bit further how the State Board of Education plays into teacher licensing or teacher certification requirements?
Currently, well, the State Board of Education does certify whether a candidate has met the requirements set forth for what the area that they would be teaching in. And then then once they go through that process, then they could apply for a license in the state of Kansas.
You can ask a follow-up, yes?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Would the State Board of Education be able to implement this without the legislature?
The State Board of Ed, if you recall, when we had a presentation a week ago from the licensing department of the State Board of Education, they are working on looking at a variety of different tracks for licensing. I would say it would be could they just eliminate any kind of requirement, state-specific requirement for anybody who has a license from any place? Are you asking me if they could do that? I wouldn't want to speak for the State Board of Education, and I believe there's someone testifying today from the State Board of Education, but that currently, they have the constitutional responsibility to oversee public education in the state of Kansas.
I would simply add that we've had several other reciprocity bills and compact bills in particular that we have passed as a legislature because it commits the agencies, it commits the state to that. And I would simply say reinforce the benefit of being there at almost ground zero is having someone from the state representing us at the table when the rules and regs are developing. But
I would totally agree with the chair, because if we are among the first 10, we will be in that. I mean, there's a framework laid out, but we will be in that group to be making those final decisions.
Senator Gossett, did you have a follow-up? Okay.
Just a very quick question, Madam Chair. Thank you. Senator Petty, compacts in the past sometimes have kind of run amok. And what I mean by that, it's the tail wagging the dog. And so they'll say, well, we have to do this because the compact says we do. And states feel like they have to abide by whatever the compact is deciding, rather than states helping make decisions. Do you know anything about that?
Well, this would be the first compact dealing with teacher licensure. So I would be hard pressed to say, I mean, I guess if you join a compact and then you are dissatisfied, then it might feel that way.
And the reason I'm asking is that I've been licensed in more than one state, and I really had no issues with that except for being in Kansas. Missouri is reciprocity states. They automatically took my Kansas license, but if I just had a Missouri license and wanted to come to Kansas, there would be far more requirements than being in Missouri. So I was just curious about if we looked at neighboring states and like, what do they accept now? What do they not accept now? Do you know if that's been done?
I can't speak to all the states around us.
Thank you.
But there is a variety, but many states do have specific requirements for license.
Oh, of course, but some of them are reciprocity, where if you come in and you're licensed in another state, they automatically accept you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any further questions. I will add to that question that you had with regard to other states. I know that when we passed the compact for speech pathologists and audiologists, they made it abundantly clear that we would never have reciprocity with Missouri because their requirements are so significantly lower than what states that would be members of the compact would require. So they will set a certain bar, and that's why some states are going to participate and others will not. Thank you so much. Now I call on Jerry Henn. He's the Assistant Executive Director of USA Kansas and Kansas School Superintendents. Jerry, it's good to have you back.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
It's been a little bit, but it's good to have you here.
It has. I appreciate the welcome. Thank you very much. Senator Baumgartner and members, I appreciate being here. Student of mine. Right there. So I just want to bring that out. I'm really not that old. I'm just not that old, but we're excited to be here today to be a proponent of this bill. We realize that it's going to have some challenges, and we understand that, but we also want to understand that we have over 1,600 openings within the state of Kansas. And we need to have, as Senator Petty said, another tool in the shed that we can use to help maybe fill some of these positions. I don't know that we could fill them all, but at least some of these positions that are open in the state of Kansas right now. One of the things that we think would be very, very important through this process is that anytime a person would apply to one of these positions, that they definitely have to go through the vetting process, and they go through our interview process and allow our principals, superintendents, whoever that may be, do that vetting to make sure that they meet the standards of what we want to put in front of our classrooms, in front of our students. We do not want just somebody coming in with a degree that doesn't fit our schools. We know what they need. Those administrators know what they need in those classrooms. And so they have to go through that vetting process like anybody else. I would also like to say that I would hope that we would look at Kansas people over anybody else, but when we do not have a person from Kansas that would be applying, we need to have other avenues. And just hiring a substitute teacher to fill that spot, that is questionable for me as a retired administrator and as a person that supports education throughout the schools. One thing that I think we're particularly excited about are those teachers that may be, their husbands or wives may be in the military, and give them an opportunity to be able to move through the licensing procedure quickly or more quicker, if I can use that. We're excited about that opportunity that might help fill some of those positions on around our military bases and installations there. The other thing, if I can get to your question, I found in the bill that it says that the licensure committee will fit the license to that person. So that could be a 2-year, could be a 5-year, is the way I read it in the bill. So that would be interesting for us to do. So we stand in support of this bill, and will be available for questions at any time.
Well, committee, these are the only 2 individuals that we have that are proponents in person. I would direct you that we have written testimony from proponents. We have Scott Rothschild, who is here. I thought I saw him. Yes, so if you had questions for him. We also have Michelle Rickert with Midwest. She's the Midwest Regional Liaison for the Office of the Assistant Secretary of Defense. And I think this is once again a situation where what is happening with regard to our armed forces and what states are ready to make sure that family members that have the credentials, if they are moved to a different state, the Department of Defense wants to make sure that they're moved to a state that is very receptive for the family to make that transition. So I appreciate that her willingness to testify, to provide that. Jerry already sat down, but that doesn't mean that we can't bring him right back up here. Any questions for Jerry? Talk to us. We talk about 1,600 openings. We do repeatedly hear about the shortage for special education teachers. What is it? Do we have a greater need in our elementary, our middle school, or our high school area?
The last time I looked, it's pretty even all the way through. I just know that when I was busy in the buildings and in the districts, I remember having 40 people apply for a math position, or an elementary position, we would have 100 people apply. And now we're down to 5, sometimes 2 if we're looking at physics or something along there. And even elementary, we're at 5 to 10 maybe. And I was in the Northeast Kansas. I know when you move west, it's worse.
The one question I do have is it your understanding with this bill that the reciprocity would work even if the individual continued to reside in a neighboring state?
Yes, I do understand it to be that way.
Okay. And when we think of the districts, all the districts that we have that are bordering other states, we know that they still are dealing with issues of shortages.
Absolutely. Nationwide problem.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Senator Straub.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm all for credentialing people to be able to teach. I know myself, when I was in graduate school, I substitute taught at a number of different schools in the Manhattan area. And I'm all for extending that reciprocal licensing. However, and I do have the numbers on the vacancies and the number of vacancies that have had no applicant at all. What would it take for us to license parents or grandparents that have bachelor's degrees? And what would it take to accredit their private homeschools or private schools?
I will say thank you for that question. That's a loaded question. You know, anybody that has a bachelor's degree can automatically sign up and get their substitute license easily. To move forward through that process, they would have to meet the guidelines of what the state has set up for licensure. That would be something that the state board would have to make some changes, or licensure would have to come through them to make some changes. So that's something that would have to change for just anybody. There are, I guess I should say, there are programs that allow people who have bachelors to come and teach and work through those processes while they're actually teaching. They can do that. There is also a military program, Troops to Teachers, I think is the name of that they can come in and you can work with them while they are training to be a teacher. So there are some programs out there that allow that. It just takes some time to get them through all that licensure piece. Now, as far as homeschools to be accredited, that's a whole different process that would have to take place, and that all of that would have to be approved by the state board as well as, I would assume, the legislature. But that's something that somebody else could answer rather than Jerry.
Any other questions? Senator Petty.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I always have to choose between which back or and thanks for testifying. We were talking about, or the chair mentioned special ed and the shortage that we've seen that along over time. Yep. I've been so surprised the last few years about the shortage at the elementary level, and specifically, I think one of the latest things I've heard about, like 5th grade, and so you kind of expounded on that. Do you have any thoughts about why it's trickled down to even? We would think about special areas like math and science and always being a little more harder to fill because fewer people get their certification in that area. But then when you think about 5th grade, your thoughts about that?
Well, and these would be purely my thoughts. Okay. Even when I was a building administrator, we started to see, especially special ed, mathematics, that's where we started to see that shortage was there. And that's been 10, 15 years ago. We started to see that. I never worried too much about it because I was in eastern Kansas, and so I knew that I could get people to come. I knew that, but I would always listen to my colleagues on the western part of Kansas say, yeah, I had 2 people apply. So we saw that coming, and we didn't, as a state, didn't jump on that problem then, which we probably should have. As far as 5th graders, hopefully you've been in a 5th grade classroom lately. They're exciting young students to be around. It is a challenging age to really work through. Anything from that 4th grade to about 8th grade is an interesting group of students to work through. I found that my time as a middle school principal was the best. It was best. I enjoyed those kids a lot more than I ever expected to, but I also know that they took a lot of my time. And so I really can't give you a solid answer as to why 5th grade is so difficult to find other than they're miniature adults in little bodies. So,
Tweens.
the tweens, yes.
Very much.
Sure.
Okay, I'm not seeing any further questions, so now we're going to go to opponent testimony in person. First up, we have Ron Hubbard, President of the American Federation of Teachers, representing Kansas. And Ron, is it Hubbard or Hobart? Hobart. Okay, I took a guess and I
It's
was
okay.
wrong. Thank
It
you.
happens all the time.
Thank you for being here.
You're welcome. Good afternoon, dear Chairman Brumgardner and the members of the Senate Ed Committee. As a lifelong educator and the president of American Federation of Teachers of Kansas, I stand before you with a very heavy heart and a strong voice of opposition of Senate Bill 66. The proposed Interstate Teacher Mobility Compact is a reckless and irresponsible solution to the teacher shortage crisis. Instead of addressing the root causes of why our dedicated teachers and hardworking teachers are leaving our profession, this bill would open the door to out-of-state teachers with subpar qualifications and hand over control to politically and ideology-influenced legislators. The reason behind the teacher attrition crisis are numerous and well-documented: low pay, lack of support, overwhelming workload, limited autonomy, and unrelenting stress are just a few of the factors driving our teachers out of the profession. And let us not forget the COVID-19 pandemic and the lack of respect the public and politicians have shown for the teacher profession. But perhaps the most devastating of all is the political interference that creates an unfavorable work environment for our teachers. Controversial issues such as standardized testing, school choice or vouchers, banning books, and the funding cuts are just a few examples of the political battles that have no place in our classrooms. The thought of allowing teachers from another state with lower standards to enter our classrooms with no consideration for quality of education our students will receive is a travesty. We cannot and should not sacrifice the futures of our students for the sake of a quick fix to a teacher shortage. I implore the members of this Senate Education Committee to listen to the voices of the teachers in the classrooms. We know what our students need. We know what it takes to attract and retain the best educators. Instead of passing this dangerous bill, I call upon you to form a task force with the State Department of Ed, the Kansas State Board of Education, Kansas NEA, and AFT Kansas to address the underlying causes of teacher attrition, including low pay, inadequate training, and licensing procedures. It is time to put aside political agendas and do what is right for our students and our teachers. The future of education in Kansas is in your hands, and I ask that you make the right choice. Thank you.
Thank you. You may want to sit on the front row so that you don't, well, literally, so you don't have to go back and forth when we ask you for questions, but I guess you can sit in the back row if you want to. You're going to come forward. All right, great. Next up, we have Timothy Graham. He is the Director of Government Relations and Coalitions, but I'm thinking you're here representing KNEA. Okay, great. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. It's the first time I've seen you this year.
I've been here.
Yeah, well, in front of your committee. So I appreciate the opportunity to testify. And a quick housekeeping note. Third sentence from the bottom, put an E after moral, please. So anyways.
Teachers, yeah, the
There you
teachers in the
go.
room saw that. Thank you.
Yeah, representing teachers, I need to do a better job of proofreading. So anyways, again, thank you for the opportunity to testify. At our representative assembly every year, KNEA supports a number of KNEA members go through a process that support a number of resolutions that determine our legislative agenda. And we do talk about reciprocity. And just to let you know, KNEA membership supports reciprocity of licensure and certification for educators, coming to Kansas from other states, so long as the initial licensing and certification standards meet those set forth for all Kansas educators. So that's what our membership has told us to advocate on behalf of and try to ensure in state statute. We do greatly appreciate the thought that's gone into this. We do, and it pains me to be on the opposite side of an old friend, Senator Pat Petty, and others of you on this committee that may be in support of this. But unfortunately, we do oppose this. And our opposition, and I get into it a little bit here, but simply our initial opposition to this is because membership in such a compact does not guarantee that the initial licensing and certification standards of the partner states in such commission or compact would meet those that are set forth for all Kansas educators. We do oppose it for a couple of other for a number of other reasons. I'll get into those very briefly. We believe fairness is an issue. There's a possibility that the dynamic would exist for a wide discrepancy between standards from one teacher to another. And again, back to the sentence that I asked you to correct earlier, I'm worried about what it would do to teacher morale. So I do want to recognize that I understand that this bill does not prevent a state from eventually requiring a teacher to come to the standards that are set by the State Board of Education. However, we're afraid that that's not a guarantee, and we're also afraid that it may never take place. So again, that gives us some concern. I talk about the impact on the learning environment for students, and again, I'm not going to go through all of this, but I will highlight that the potential of placing individuals in the classroom without rigorous training and background knowledge opens up schools, school districts, and most importantly, our students to potential risk, complications, and other consequences. We're afraid Senate Bill 66 could have the potential to set such an environment up. And understand, I very specifically used the word could. And at the end, I talk about the Kansas Department of Education deliberations. I do encourage you to read what I wrote, but in short, we feel like this is their lane. I know that they've been discussing this as late as January, and they're having a hard time figuring out whether this is a good idea. And so at this point, we're deferring to them on licensure, since the Constitution states that that's their job, and that's another reason for us to oppose this. So I'm available for questions.
Okay, front row's available to you.
Oh, boy.
Last up, we have Ann Ma, Legislative Liaison for the Kansas State Board of Education. Welcome back, Ann.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair and Committee, for allowing us to make some comments today. The teacher shortage in Kansas is real, and it has been a focus of the State Board of Education for years. Working with local districts and our legislative partners, we've made a lot of headway, and we still have a long way to go. And it is the State Board's constitutional obligation and authority to address. We just think that the proposed Interstate Teacher Mobility Compact is not the answer at this time. The State Board heard a detailed report on the proposal at our December meeting and debated it in January. Our attorney's been working on it for a year. And in the course of the discussion in January, as we asked more and more questions, it became clear that the quality of teachers this compact could allow in our state was not a place we wanted to go. Our concerns were so great that when it came time to make a motion to approve it, we could not get a single state board member to even make the motion. Kansas can be proud of the standards we require of prospective teachers. At a time when students need more depth, not less, this is just not acceptable to allow unqualified teachers to get a license in Kansas. And we are just not convinced yet that the compact would prevent that from happening. That does not mean the State Board is opposed to compacts. We do participate when we believe it's in the best interest of our kids. And if you look at my testimony, you'll see a couple of interstate compacts that we're already engaged in, and I can send you a list of the entire number of interstate compacts we already participate in. And it doesn't mean we're not doing anything about the problem. We have introduced any number of new paths to teaching in the last few years, perhaps the most successful being the Teacher Apprentice Program at Wichita State. Some call it para-to-teaching, where you can work and get your pedagogy at the same time. It's hugely successful. We also did the limited apprenticeship in special ed, also a new combined degree where you can teach special ed with your bachelor's degree instead of having to go on to get your master's now. We also had a blue ribbon task force that brought forward many recommendations for local, state, and legislative action, and we continue to work on this every day. Licensure is our constitutional job and not a legislative matter. States are configured differently in terms of their state board of ed, but in Kansas, there is no legislative action required. We could have approved this compact in January. We just thought it was not in the best interest of kids. But the problem is not that we're not doing enough to clear a path to teaching. There are other elephants in the room that have been mentioned before: the impact of COVID, the loss of due process, the low pay, the continual beat down on teachers with folks claiming some woke agenda that doesn't exist. This is a team sport. If the legislature wants to help play a role in helping, we more than welcome that. We hope you will seriously consider the recommendations of the recent K-Board task force. Let us continue to work on the compact. We actually believe, and something we discovered in January, is that as a state board, we can actually implement the best parts of this compact to smooth the way for people coming in without actually being in the compact and subjecting our students to low-quality teachers. To answer some things that were mentioned, we already make military spouses a priority. Yes, neighboring states are lowering standards, and the Supreme Court did say that this is our path. So we look forward to working with you to bring more qualified teachers to our classrooms. We just believe this compact is not the answer at this time. Let us continue to work on it, and please do not forward Senate Bill 66. I will stand for questions. Thank you.
Committee, what questions do you have for our three opponent testimonies? We'll start with Senator Petty, and then we'll go to Senator Sykes.
This is a question for Ann Ma.
Yes.
And Ann, thank you for being here. You look very Southwestern today. You said, and I do applaud all the work that's going on, looking at different avenues of licensure through the State Board of Education. But an issue that I've continually hear is the difficulty or the slow process of being able, you mentioned military, of being able to get a license in Kansas. And so, so what exactly is the State Board of Education doing right now with that to speed up that process of, let's just take a military person that's coming in?
Well, I think there's already a law about that, but
What's being done to speed it up? Because
I mean, faster than the law requires? I mean,
To get a license doesn't necessarily, I mean, the steps that a person has to go through to get that license, even though, yes, that is in law, but it seems that it's taking too long.
well, as far as I know, we're meeting what the law requires and to push military spouses through as quickly as we can. I have not heard that that is a problem for military. We're meeting that law. We agree.
could we please have you work with legislative research on how many applicants you have received from military spouses and what the turnaround time has been?
Sure.
Okay?
I just have one follow-up question, and I don't even know if this is something that is CAP, but, you know, we have a lot of people that will get a substitute license. And there have been changes made in that too for the amount of time that you can substitute now as opposed
Temporary changes.
okay, I don't remember how long those are in place, but so they can be in the classroom longer than they were able to be able.
Yeah, that was a couple years ago, I think. Yeah, but again, a lot of the substitute things are temporary, like the teal thing winds up at the end of this year, and we've asked our Professional Standards Board and our Committee on Teacher Vacancy and Retention to put together some permanent solution for subs.
Good, so that would fit along with what the question I was going to ask, is that as they're looking at that, are they looking at the number of long-term subs or subs that want to transition or have transitioned to being a full-time certified classroom teacher?
There'd be
a lot of times they're certified already, they just.
Yeah, there'd be a lot of pathways for somebody who had a bachelor's degree or was a full-time sub to transition. If they had the bachelor's degree, that's kind of the starting point.
I know, but my question was, is there any tracking about that movement?
I don't know. I'd have to ask Shane about that. I know we really worked on the para-to-teaching idea that's really blossomed at Wichita State. That turned out to be a real winner. You get a para, you know they're good, you know that you want them working with your kids, and they can work and go to school at the same time and get that teaching certificate. That's been really good. So I would believe, if a substitute had the same beginning qualifications, they could also get on that path.
Thanks.
Yeah, I know that Fort Hays State has been, the para-to-teacher licensure has been around for some time. Senator Sykes.
This can be for any of the three of you. I understand the concern, but I also see the benefits of joining a compact kind of at the beginning to kind of set the standards and ground rules. And I do believe, I haven't studied it specifically, but you could withdraw at some time. So I guess my question is, why not try to be a part of something? And then if it doesn't fit, the state could leave.
Well, as I've tried to explain, we have not totally ruled out the compact. We just said when we started asking questions about it, it was not clear to us that we would not be letting unqualified teachers in the door. So we still have a lot more to chew through on this, and we're not done looking at it. But if we can also get the same benefits without being in the compact, that's even better. Then we don't ever have to worry about getting out of something that didn't work. But we can write our own rules. We have self-executing powers on the state board, and our attorney assured us that if we have some things in this we really like that will work, we can just do it. So we have to have regulations written, but yeah, we can do it. But let me make clear, we are not done talking about the compact.
Senator Straub.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Ann. Can you give us some insight into different states and their varying teacher licensing requirements? Like what would be the least restrictive and what state would be the most restrictive?
I don't think I have a tally on least or most, and it would probably depend on whether you're talking elementary or high school. I did, as a former high school science teacher, that really piqued my interest because, for example, if in some state you only had 15 hours of physics to teach, in Kansas you have to have twice that, plus a biology component. So they would come here under the compact, they'd be licensed, certified, endorsed to teach physics, and would not be nearly as qualified as the Kansas graduate. Anyway, I talked to Dr. Schrock to that question. I said, well, just talk to me about science because it's kind of easy to understand. And he sent me back a note that in Kansas, like just for biology, we have 24 to 40 hours required, plus they have to take a physics and a chemistry course. But in all the states around us, they have what they call a general science certificate that we don't even have because we don't want to go there. So they have much lower requirements for teaching high school science there than we do.
One more.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And one last question. Where does Kansas rank amongst these other states in student achievement or
I'm glad you asked.
education?
I just heard a report today that particularly like on the ACT, Kansas beats just about every state in the Midwest. So really good.
Committee, what other questions do we have? I would like a little bit of information from Mr. Hobart. You indicated that there were a couple of problems that you wanted to have addressed, and one of them was the difficulty with regard to the licensure process, and the other was inadequate training. Tell us about the inadequate training and the problems with the licensure process.
I was speaking of other states. Their licensing process, like Ann just said, is different requirements in college courses. So that's the angle I was going on at that point. You know, every state is different, just like every school building is different. And so when you start comparing different states to what they have to take compared to what we have to take, what I went through. And when I went through in 1989 when I started teaching, it's completely different. I have 2 of my 4 children that are teachers. And so comparing what they went through compared to what I went through years ago, it was completely different. So I feel Kansas has done a great job of keeping up to standards and expecting high expectations from our teachers. My point is like Ann pointed out, it's different from every state when you go to a state university there.
Mr. Hobart, I will go back and look at your testimony on video because it's being captured. But I am quite certain what you testified to was that you wanted different groups to come together.
Yes.
In that and to address the issues that were impacting the teacher shortages. And in that, because I specifically wrote down the inadequate training and the licensure, and I will go back and double check that. You did mention about funding cuts. That was another thing that you mentioned. So do you believe there have been funding cuts in the last 4 years in this state?
Not since we've had Laura Kelly as our, she's fully funded schools.
No, she has not. The legislature has done that.
Okay, well, she was leading the charge, and I think a lot of my premise from my testimony is that as a classroom teacher last year in 5th grade, we are not heard, and I think that's where the frustration is that, teachers are in the classroom doing the difficult work, and there's no respect, and there's no, it's a constant battle.
You indicated low pay, and your
Yes.
board, their school boards determine pay. You indicated limited autonomy. That would be your building administrator that impacts your autonomy. I will say this. When you mention lack of respect, the fact that you came to this committee, which passed out the funding formula that did get negotiated, and I was the chair of the negotiating team that brought forth the full funding that was approved by the state Supreme Court. For you to come in and testify about funding cuts, when in fact there have not been funding cuts in the last 5 years.
Okay,
That would be an issue where respect would be challenged. I also want you to know, having served on Public Health Committee and the Judiciary Committee, when we talk about COVID and the impact in this state, was funding cut from public schools?
No, not in the last recent few years.
In
You're right.
COVID, was funding cut from schools?
Funding was increased because we needed to get computers into our students' hands.
Okay. And how many folks in Kansas lost their jobs? How many businesses in Kansas were closed? People that did not only have an income, but when they were trying to get their funds through the Department of Labor, they didn't receive any funds. because that system was broken. We had people come testify. They had called the Department of Labor hotline, not 50 times, not 100 times. Several of them testified that they called more than 200 times per day. So when a teacher or an individual such as yourself that represents a teacher's organization comes to the Senate Education Committee and they talk about funding cuts, which haven't occurred, more money went to public education than ever before, including during COVID. No one from public education lost their jobs, but we know of not hundreds, but thousands of people that lost their jobs and had no income during COVID. You can understand, I hope, or appreciate that there is going to be focus on those that were paid and the services that didn't occur for kids, because we had schools that remained closed well after others had opened. And those kids, we've heard testimony in this committee, were going to McDonald's to have Wi-Fi to try and do a lesson for their class. So I do appreciate that you're here to testify. We are completely out of time. We're beyond time. But please know, the expectation is when you come and testify in this committee, come with truth.
Okay.
Come with truth.
I respectfully agree to disagree that the teacher's voice has not been heard, and that's a lot of my premise.
It's always
Thank
been
you.
heard here, and it's always been welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Committee, we are adjourned.